Celestia sat on her soft bed, reviewing matters of state, such as tax revenue and monthly expenditures. One letter, however, wasn't routine. It was from the Royal Scientific Society, and stamped with a classified mark. What could be so important, she thought. Before she got a chance to open the letter, however, a wind of magic appeared in her window, and burst into a scroll. Her faithful student had sent her a report on friendship. Celestia did so enjoy reading them, and looked forward to it. It was such a nice touch of excitement on an otherwise dull schedule. She used her magic to unroll the scroll, and began to read. Dearest Princess Celestia, I am writing you to inform Her Majesty that I have endeavored to research the species known as Changelings. After the attack on Canterlot, I have become quite interested in this subject, and would very much like to know more about these enigmatic creatures. However, a scouring of the library here in Ponyville has revealed no such documentation on them. I've checked 3 times thus far, and none of the catalogs have an entry for changelings. I am therefore asking whether you have access to any authoritative literature relating to changelings, and if so, could you send as much as you can to me? If not, do you happen to know of any? I have investigated compendiums and bestiarities of any mention, but there is one passing mention of a book on urban legends. However, it was published a mere 10 years ago, and no scientific content is present. The entry was short, and I found it to be very uncertain. I've even asked Princess Cadence whether or not she knew much about these creatures. She was, after all, the only pony who seemed to know what they were. A return letter tells me that the Queen informed her, but this was where Cadence's exclusive knowledge ends. Feeding on love and being able to shapeshift have been well reported, as I'm sure you know, but everything else, from history to biology, inhabitants, and the like, are absent details. If it does so happen that even you have no access to any concrete information, I request permission to conduct my own research. If the changeling is a truly undocumented race, I would love nothing more than to contribute to the scientific community. Yours truly, Twilight Sparkle. Celestia had mixed feelings on this letter. She couldn't help but smile at her student. She was always thirsting for knowledge, and would go to great lengths to get information. Twilight would read, and occasionally experiment, all to enhance her already impressive fortune of data, albeit sometimes obsessively. But this particular subject wasn't the regal Alaxsxaq had wanted the purple filly to pursue. She feared for her safety. The changelings had proved to be a dangerous lot. They were a single-minded swarm of insects, zealously chasing a goal. Their lust for energy was only exasperated by the euphoria experienced from feeding on something as personal as love. Such intrusive behavior. Celestia knew she had to do all in her power to prevent Twilight from going through with this. The changeling swarm was an unforgiving, cruel monster. It should have been destroyed long ago. Dead and unknown, it would be harmless. Living and unknown is a recipe for disaster. Celestia uncorked a bottle of ink and dipped the quill in it. Using her magic, in beautiful manuscript, she drafted a letter, trying to tactically convince Twilight to relinquish her silly notions of investigating the changelings. With a proof of magic, the letter was on its way to its recipient. The princess levitated the unopened letter from the RSS. Ripping the envelope, she unfolded the typed parcel. Dear Princess Celestia, co-ruler of Equestria, the Royal Scientific Society has a very sensitive matter to discuss with you. To ensure the security of this communique, the ink is invisible. If your Highness is indeed reading this, please dispel the charm. She knew full well what the spell used for secret documents. With a flash of her horn, the rest of the letter revealed itself. Good. Now that we can speak in private, there has been an unfortunate event at Lab 28. For further reasons of security, the details will not be discussed. However, Officials are ready to accept your arrival. This is high priority. We fear the worst. The official report is mechanical failure. Our public relations board has been spared all sensitive and crucial details, but has diffused the situation. The only informed agents are the Society Council and the lab employees. Confidentiality agreements are still in effect. I trust you are enforcing them, Princess. However, our scouting efforts reveal a particularly voyeuristic individual. As of yet, the pony has caused no harm. His motives are unknown, and all attempts to search his home have ended in threats from a firearm. In addition to your presence at the lab, we request aid in apprehending this interloper. There is nothing more that we can say that cannot wait for the isolated walls of the lab. We eagerly await, Princess. The Royal Scientific Society Council. P.S. Please destroy this message once you have completed reading it. We have taken the liberty of erasing its information from the National Postal Database. Celestia's eyes widened as she set the letter down. Her mind was racing as all the possible implications of the letter formed within her brain. She tossed the letter into her fireplace and made sure the paper burned. Running into the hall, she scouted out her sister, recently woken up for the night. "Luna," she said, "I'm taking a short break. I'll be back soon. Take care of things while I'm gone." The midnight pony gave Celestia a puzzled look. "Where are you going, dear sister? And why so sudden?" Before she could get her answer, though, Luna watched Celestia run away. She must be in a hurry. Oh well, I'm sure it's someplace nice. I wonder if I can take such an unexpected leave. When Celestia is here, of course. Back in another hall, as inconspicuously as possible, the Alabaster Princess flew out of a window and caught a north wind. Her heart pounding, she prepared for the worst. A desolate gray sky blanketed the field. It was never really different. This secluded corner of Equestria scarcely ever got the chance to enjoy its monarch's warm sun. Winters were especially unforgiving. The frigid wind blew encumbering across the flat, white plain. But today was a typical spring afternoon, and a light drizzle made the environment look all the more dreary. Dr. Antoline stood on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee as he looked out onto the scenery. He had become used to living in self-imposed exile in the far province of the northern plains. He had actually grown to like the weather somewhat, and the quiet air was perfect for his research. After receiving his doctorate in biology at Manhattan University, Antoline was asked to join an expedition in an effort to catalog new species in uncharted territories far east. The Royal Scientific Society paid him a hefty sum to come back with at least 5 new animals documented. He was well respected during his student years, and specialized as a zoologist, with a particular interest in entomology. He wrote his doctoral thesis on the sociology of members of the Myrmeleontidae family. Unfortunately, the expedition was doomed from the start. A combination of disease and difficult terrain killed several members, and the Endeavored was called off before Antoline could join them. Feeling disheartened, the young doctor returned to his hometown, in fact, not far from his current abode. There, he heard about a story from his childhood. Small black creatures inhabited the mountains, unknown as to what they were or where they came from. When he was growing up, Antoline, as many others, thought nothing of these tales, except the ramblings of old, delusional ponies. However, throughout college, he contemplated the idea of another species to discover. Some nights, he would imagine himself winning an award for such a discovery, a big trophy and fame, Biologist of the Year. But there was more to the old stories he neglected to listen to as a colt. The myths were long forgotten by every pony, sans an old stallion on the outskirts of town. He talked about some ponies who live out in the mountains, away from civilization. Some were his friends. Every so often, they would disappear without a trace. Antoline therefore decided to entertain the old pony's tale. He first investigated any books he could. Nothing. He consulted the old pony. The sightings were relatively recent. No literature published or mentioned in anything. Well, if nothing could come to light, he thought he should be the one to conduct research. Using the lump sum paid up front by the RSS, Dr. Antoline built a small house near the mountains and fully stocked it with all the lab equipment he would need: test tubes, microscopes, preservation chemicals, specimen freezers. From there, he ventured off into the mountains, always bringing his father's old rifle in case the creatures wanted him to disappear. And this is how he spent the next 5 years. During that time, however, he discovered a building several miles from his house. It was a large, plain, gray concrete building. It looked like some sort of compound. Upon closer inspection, he saw a sign labeled Lab 28, Restricted Access. As curious as he was of this mysterious building, he had another goal. About 3 years ago, a remarkable thing happened on his way out into the mountains. Discouraged for having not found anything, Antoline's spirit immediately lifted up as 2 black creatures crawled slowly towards him. They were weak, looking starved and cold. He moved closer to examine them, but not 2 minutes later, they both just died. Bringing them back to his lab, he studied the corpses. They weren't very big, only about as large as a small mare. They had a small upturned horn and insect-like wings. Covering their whole bodies was a black, chitin-like shell and a dark blue, iridescent carapace on the back. He stored the treated one away and placed the other on a metal table. A dissection commenced and revealed an organ structure not characteristic of insects, but more akin to ponies. Stranger still, they possessed both an exoskeleton and bones, as well as red blood. The only major difference was the brain. There wasn't one. The cluster of nerve tissue in its head was probably just an advanced type of ganglion, good for mostly anatomical and motor movements. His circumstances been different, Dr. Antoline would have published his findings and presented the specimens to the scientific community. But shortly after his chance discovery, he wandered to the lab, his main goal being completed. Hiding behind a small hill, he noticed some pony emptying a wastebasket into a dumpster. Later that night, he investigated the bin and found some pieces of paper. Most of them were just receipts and the like. However, one paper caught his attention. It was some sort of a report, and judging by the incomplete paragraphs at the top and bottom, it was part of a multi-page document. The words originally didn't make much sense out of context, but the next morning, a knock on his door revealed several ponies dressed in suits, demanding that the doctor leave immediately. Not knowing what else to do, he threatened to shoot them. Afterwards, Antoline realized perhaps there's more to this than he thought. He would continue his research and secretly investigate the lab. Every so often, the ponies would come back, and every time the doctor would threaten them. In between threats, he examined all his samples and tried to find a correlation between his unknown creatures and the document. A single sentence caused his suspicion. Exoskeleton primarily composed of keratinous plates. Chemical analysis suggests it's the same for his pony bugs. This was a trait so far unique to them. Antoline stood ready for the final journey into the mountains, ready to find another specimen. He never got his hopes up, as in 8 years, he only found these 2. But he was searching for a hive of some sort today. He looked at a map of the region, dotted with black X's. and eyed one spot still unexplored. This was it, he thought. Several hours later, he stood at the rim of a long-extinct volcanic crater. There, blighting the ground, was a giant greenish structure. He did it. He finally found the hive. The ecstatic stallion ran down the slope, seeing no sign of activity. A bit closer, and still nothing. The entrance to the hive was massive, but the whole thing looked weak and in need of repair. With light coming through thin green membranes on the roof, Antoline saw thousands of black shells on the ground. Each shell was a creature, just like the two he had back home, only these were decaying. Their shells were cracked and falling off, revealing red flesh, perforated with maggots and other insects. Some had entrails and blood strewn about. None were moving. He lightly tapped one, causing the putrefaction gases to escape from the carcass. Further into the hive were even some wolves feeding on the pony bugs. On his way out, though, Antoline came across what perhaps was the only live one. It struggled to stand and walked towards the pony. A weak green glow came from its horn. The doctor matched the glow with one of his own horn. The creature, however, paid no attention. It merely came closer, with each step causing more of its exoskeleton to fall off. The joints leaked bloods, and soft underbelly flesh hung on by what seemed like nerves. The creature quietly cried out in pain, and by the time it was 5 feet from the stallion, its forelegs gave out, physically breaking, revealing fractured bones and bloody marrow. Antoline could have sworn the tissue looked as if it was trying to regenerate. With one final shriek, the creature's face fell off, bit by bit. The now dead animal lay on the ground, joining the rest of the swarm. The doctor wasn't quite sure what to think. Were they killed by a disease? Is this how nature so cruelly ends their lives? Were they attacked? And where was their queen? They appeared to have once lived similarly to bees or ants. Surely they had a matriarch. His pondering was cut short as the hive's structure began to collapse. He ran out, watching what may have been a glorious building crumble to dust. Bowing his head, Antoline left the crater and walked back home, where perhaps the last two of his creatures were. Along the way, though, he saw Lab 28, but something was wrong. Ponies ran frantically. It was too far for him to see fine details, but it looked like a crime scene. Yellow tape blocked off a building as several uniformed ponies brought out body bags that were blood red? What's going on? Before he left, out of the corner of his eye was a long, black object, handled by more ponies. Something was going on here, he thought, and Dr. Antoline was willing to bet it had something to do with the death of all those insectoids.